This week on Africa Weekly, we focus on the ball tampering scandal during last week's Test match in South Africa, which has left Australian cricket reeling. We travel to Mozambique, where a recent attack has raised fears of a radicalised youth. And we meet Sierra Leone's people's pop star, Emmerson Boukari, who's been a thorn in the side of successive governments over his 15-year career. But first, a summary of the stories that made the headlines this week. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has been re-elected, with preliminary results pointing to a 92% victory. Around 40% of Egypt's 60 million registered voters turned out to cast their ballot over the three-day poll, with 2 million spoiling their ballot. El-Sisi's sole contender is little-known politician Musa Mustafa Musa, who entered the race at the last minute after all other opponents were either disqualified or arrested. Musa himself was known to support El-Sisi.
The other candidate, most of the people didn't know him. He didn't have an electoral program, he didn't represent himself, and he ran while supporting Sisi. So why should I have voted for him? I voted for Sisi, who was winning anyway. It was a referendum, not an election.
Leaders of the two most heavily armed towns in western Libya met for the first time since they fought for control of Tripoli 4 years ago in talks hailed as historic.
For the sake of the unity of Libya and to renounce the division between brothers in all areas of Libya, we are determined to bring together Libyans and establish security and safety, spread justice and tranquility, and renounce violence and killing.
The towns of Misrata and Zintan were among the first to rise up against the regime of dictator Muammar Gaddafi, who was killed in 2011. The two sides agreed to set up a committee to look into the main issues, such as the fate of prisoners and those who have disappeared, ahead of their next meeting, due to take place in Misrata. Ivory Coast's ruling coalition won an overwhelming victory in the country's first senatorial elections. The polls were boycotted by the opposition, who accused the Electoral Commission of bias. The opposition had called for a reform of the commission and for all votes to be postponed. Hundreds of people took to the streets of the Ghanaian capital Accra to protest against a controversial military deal with Washington, which was passed by Parliament last week. The agreement has come under heavy criticism from the opposition, who say it undermines the country's sovereignty. The United States has expanded its military presence in Africa in the past decade, ostensibly to stop the spread of Islamist extremism by groups such as Islamic State, Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. Botswana's President Ian Khama wrapped up a national farewell tour before standing down in a power transfer to his vice president, bidding a long goodbye to a population of just 2.2 million after serving the constitutional maximum of 10 years in office.
A disgraced Steve Smith, captain of the Australian cricket team, following last weekend's ball tampering scandal during the third Test match in South Africa.
I take full responsibility. I made a serious error of judgment, and I now understand the consequences.
Accused of turning a blind eye to the plot, Smith, along with vice-captain David Warner, were sent home from Cape Town with year-long bans from the game. The pair also lost contracts worth around $2 million after the Indian Premier League banned them from playing in this year's tournament. Warner was charged with masterminding the plan to tamper with the ball to their bowler's advantage using sandpaper and instructing opening batsman Bancroft to carry it out.
If we had a discussion during the break on myself, I saw an opportunity to potentially use some tape, get some granules from the rough patches on the wicket and try to change the ball condition.
Bancroft has been suspended for 9 months for his role in the scheme. Cricket Australia announced that Smith and Bancroft would not be considered for team leadership positions until a minimum of 12 months after the end of their suspensions, and Warner will be barred from such positions for life. Despite the ban, the governing body said that Smith and Warner would be permitted and encouraged to play club cricket. All three players will be required to undertake 100 hours of voluntary service in community cricket. but it may take a while for fans to trust the players again.
Disappointed with the whole thing. The captain standing down was the only thing he could do, and we'll wait and see what happens after this.
In the wake of the scandal, Australian cricket coach Darren Lehmann announced his resignation. Wicketkeeper Tim Paine has taken over the Australian captaincy for the fourth and final test in Johannesburg as the side attempts to recover its battered reputation.
This mound of rubble in Mozimbao de Praia, in extreme north of Mozambique, was once a mosque. It was demolished by the government after an attack in October, attributed to a group of young men who are believed to have frequented it. Around 30 of them stormed a police post and an army garrison. 2 police officers were killed and as many as 14 attackers struck down in the counter-assault.
Before they were like us, they prayed like us. Then as soon as they started listening to those tapes from Somalia, they began to call themselves Al-Shabaab.
The apparent jihadist assault provoked a backlash among Mozambicans who are still recovering from a long civil war. Authorities said there was no proof of a link to Somalia's Al-Shabaab militants or any other known jihadist group. But it was found that several of the young attackers had regularly visited Tanzania, Sudan or Somalia, where they were allegedly radicalized.
Muita gente fora enganado por assim e eles tiveram campo.
Initially, we tried to warn the authorities, but we couldn't stop them.
E nós, no princípio mesmo, tivemos conhecimento.
Many young people in this poverty-stricken region have been radicalized by Islamist extremists who ban their followers from voting or sending their children to school and encourage them to fight the state. At least 300 people were arrested following the attack and several mosques closed. Roadblocks remain in place in surrounding villages where some of the attackers are believed to be hiding, and villagers say attacks and kidnappings are continuing.
My wife was kidnapped while we were fleeing, and then they shot at me, 2 rounds, which passed close by me.
The authorities are seeking to reassure locals that the threat has diminished and say they have no record of kidnappings. But for the villagers here, a threat remains, at least until all the attackers are behind bars.
Greedy politicians, starving citizens. Sierra Leonean pop star Emerson Bakari's music aims to hold the powerful to account.
Of course, the chorus talks about it's just bits and pieces of stuff. You're calling their attention to stuff. There's no water supply in the city, like water don't dry in Aguma. They should understand that.
Corruption, poverty, populism. For the past 15 years, Emerson Bakari has been raising awareness about Sierra Leone's social evils through melody. Outgoing President Ernest Bai Koroma recently compared the singer to a fly on his shoulder, a nickname Emerson proudly wears.
All I want is the message to reach the people. Like I said, 70% of the people are illiterate. So sometimes they are uninformed. They really do not know what's happening in the country.
Better known as simply Emerson, the Afrobeat singer is one of a few successful artists in the country to criticise the government. Despite pushback from leaders, the pop star remains confident in his message, and according to his manager, Emerson's very key to success lies in voicing his truth.
Interestingly, even the politicians have his music in their cars. They listen to it. They make references to his message in their statements. So I guess it's because he's saying the truth. You just can't deny it.
Emerson refuses to play at political rallies or back any political party.
It doesn't make sense to me to belong to a political party. It makes no sense for me because these political parties do have their own way of seeing things, you know, and I stand with the people. I stand for the country.
Whatever the outcome in Sierra Leone's presidential election, Emerson says he expects to find fresh inspiration to write even more incisive lyrics for future hits.
Next week we travel to Kenya to visit one of the largest British bases outside of Britain, where hundreds of soldiers conduct large-scale war game-style training exercises. That's all from us at Africa Weekly. Until next week.